early this morning, Lord, talking to you. Fabulous time. Thank you for all the blessings that we've had. Thank you for this study and the opportunity to dig a little bit into your word and expand that into the mind of our future. So we ask, Lord, for your grace and mercy. We ask you to help us to understand a little bit of what you have this morning. We thank you, Father, for the blessings. We ask for your grace and mercy to be with Marlene, with Mary, all of those that are struggling. Lord, it's a difficult world that we live in. But we do have you, praise God. We have the strength, we have the promise, we have the hope, and the truth. And thank you again for the answers to the
Amen. All right, we're just going to follow down this sheet, and we're going to read from these books. And basically, it's a lot of what we talked about last week, but going more in depth to make sure that that we kind of get a second exposure to some of these things. I don't know about you, but sometimes the first thing I hear something, I don't really catch the depth of it or the total import of it. And so anyways, we'll just kind of button some things up from last week and then cover some new stuff as well. This is something that's new. 1 in 5,000 what are what? And then the second line, 1 in 5,000 what are what? Okay, it takes a certain number of, with a comma, with certain more generations for a mutation to get into what percent of the population, and it takes how many more generations to get into the rest. Now, this is from my apologetics class when I was in college. And Dr. Ely, our professor, was I believe a physicist. He had a PhD in the sciences. Now, if you look at the second list of lines there, I actually duplicated the same thing, so the answers are right on your page. Yeah. 1 in 5,000 mutations are positive for the entity. In other words, if you give birth to a child, if you hear about a child being born and that child has a mutation, and a mutation is a change in the genetic structure, as opposed to what we would consider normal or typical. And 1 in 5,000 mutations are positive. Now, many are neutral. Many don't have much impact on the being at all. But 1 in 5,000 are positive. Secondly, 1 in 5,000 are dominant genetically, as opposed to recessive. So, 4,999 mutations are recessive for every one that is dominant. Now, what does that mean? That means if only 1 in 5,000 is positive and only 1 in 5,000, and it's not the same one, by the way, it's not the same one. There's 1 in 5,000 chance that the positive one is also dominant. And so when we talk about mutations as a way of evolution happening and the human race or any part of nature becoming more positive and favorable and able to survive, able to thrive, able to live, there's only a 1 in 5,000 chance that mutation will actually help. And even if it does help, there's such a small percentage that one positive thing will even be able to be passed on to the next generation. And so there's not a very good chance that mutations would explain any changes that would lead to evolution in an upward direction, shall we say. Now, it takes 900,000. So it's 900, comma, that's that little mark there, and then 000. It takes 900,000 generations for a mutation to get into 1% of the population.
I would assume that those numbers are greatly increased
The closer to what?
to the fall of man,
Okay.
or to the flood,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
they live longer, they, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
that number would probably be more increased at that point in history.
Yeah, yeah. Entirely possible. I also wonder, though, if in our world today where there's so much sin, if there are not more mutations, more struggles, more deviations, if you will. So I'm curious about that too.
On, kind of, very much believe that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
How far society is from the
yeah, that's right. Yeah, as people, and I think about scriptures that says that God visits, you know, the sins upon the third and fourth generation, you know, and such. And you think about all the problems that people have in life today. You know, so much of it is stuff like that, I suspect. Well, the last line is, it takes 100,000 generations then to get into the rest. In other words, it takes 1,000,000 generations. Now, for human beings, there have not been 1,000,000 generations, no matter how you slice it. For like a small insect, what is it, a tsetse fly that lives for 24 hours? You know, their generation is 1 day. And so every million days they maybe have something like this that happens. But the point here is that when the world of science looks at it and tries to claim that mutations and such are going to explain evolution, honestly, with these numbers, even at 3.7 billion years of Earth's history, if they are accurate, if they're correct, there have not been enough generations for enough evolution to see things happen from a puddle of ooze up to what we see in higher animals and even plants and trees and everything. So I that just struck me when I heard it. When I'm kind of a numbers person, and when I think about how many generations and what the chances are of anything favorable happening out of mutations, it just doesn't seem likely at all. Now the next paragraph is from Biology Online Dictionary. And you're going to laugh when I try to pronounce some of these words because I have no clue. I really don't. Examples of mutations in animals are those born with extra body parts. For example, a two-headed snake, a four-legged duck, a cyclops kitten. Those are amazing examples, aren't they? Often these kind of mutations lead to the death of the animal soon or a few days after its birth. In humans, genetic disorders are often due to a mutation involving an altered gene or chromosomal aberration. Ooh. Sickle cell disease, for instance, occurs when the 20th nucleotide of the gene for the beta chain, et cetera, and this and that happens with it. Let's go on down. Other common mutation examples in humans are Angelman syndrome, Canavan disease, color blindness, Cri-du-Chat syndrome, cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, hemophilia, Klinefelter syndrome, phenylketonuria, Prader-Willi syndrome, Taylor-Sachs disease, and Turner syndrome. Now, I have no idea what most of those are, but the ones I do know, I have a little bit of an idea of what sickle cell anemia is. I have a little bit of an idea of what hemophilia is, and a little bit of what cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, muscular dystrophy might be. Do any of those sound like they would be favorable or beneficial to the body that has them?
Absolutely not.
They don't, do they?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, the next list, and you're welcome to look all these up if you want to see for yourself. That's up to you. I'm not expecting you to.
Spina bifida.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That is right. I listed 4 possible beneficial mutations. And the first one, apolipoprotein al Milano. Now that sounds like a fancy cookie to me. Aren't Milanos fancy cookies? And as far as that polyprotein thing, I don't know about that. But apparently there are some people that are having fewer heart issues because they have better ratio of HDL or high triglyceride phenotype.
Didn't help me.
Yeah.
For years, my doctor commented on how low my triglycerides were.
Uh-huh.
I went into AFib and it took them 6 months on medicines that screwed up my left hand to finally get me into a position where they could perform heart procedures on me to get rid of the AFib.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
scratch beneficial mutation number one.
That's
It
right.
doesn't work.
That's right. Well, maybe you need beneficial mutation number
I
one.
have low triglycerides.
Oh, okay. All right. I see. I see. Yeah. Yeah.
They are so low that they put me on medicine to try and raise them for 2.5 years. And when they never came up,
Yeah.
they finally took me off the medicine.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Oh my. Oh my. Well, look at the other three here: increased bone density, malaria resistance, and tetrachromatic vision. Apparently, that's an extra set of cones in the eye that help. And I think it's mostly women that have that, because us guys are. Well, for me, I'm not colorblind, but I'm shade challenged. I don't know if that's a.
Shade
Tunnel
challenge.
vision.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. But my point here.
Loaders.
My point here is that there's not one of these that is like leading to a new species,
No.
leading to I mean, it's not like getting bit by a radioactive spider and becoming a superhero or anything like that. I saw that in a movie once. Oh yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. That's right. All right. Any comments or questions on this page before we get rid of it forever?
One thing I believe truly is when scientists do not know as much as they think they know.
Yep.
They guess. 99% of what they come up with is a guess.
Yeah. Well, in last month, in the Proof of God book, I read from him that there are so many problems that science is trying to solve that they have no clue. And so that kind of fits with what you just said, that, there are a lot of things that really need to be solved or need to be solved properly to help life, or whatever you want to say it. Yep, very good. All right, let's go to the second page. I'm going to read a few selected passages out of this Proof of God book that we used last month. And I probably have a tendency to stomp something to death. I don't mean to, but I want to make sure that we kind of get a grasp. And maybe there's something else that we can pick up as we look back at this just momentarily. Okay, I'm on page 217, and I'm going to read selected passages through the end of this chapter. For our last interview, I decided to give Bernie a chance to formally present what he saw as his proofs of God. Throughout our talks, I had been assembling my own personal keys to allowing God back into both the scientific enterprise and, more importantly for me, the enterprise of my own personal experience of the world. Top of 218. So I said, the book's called Proof of God, and it's going to have your name on it as well as mine. So, Bernie, go for it. And remember, Bernie's the scientist. Well, said Bernie, there's no point pretending that we've given any kind of formal, logical proof of God's existence. It's not like proving the Pythagorean theorem in geometry. Formal logical proof, I asked? Yes, formal logic is a specific philosophic discipline, and it proceeds by means of logical proofs following a basic if-then strategy. Kurt Gödel, and I'm probably not saying that correctly, a famous mathematician and friend of Einstein's, used a very complex and abstract set of propositions to logically prove God's existence. By the way, William Lane Craig does the same thing. He's a philosopher. I've got one of his books on my desk. I'm not going to quote from it tonight, but it is an entirely different kind of science. That type of philosophy and that type of proof. So, the essence of the argument is that given the possible existence of any number of worlds, it can be logically shown that a godlike being must exist in all of them. Joe, if you want to take the top 2 pages there. Given that all powerful beings must share a certain number of attributes, whatever the nature of these hypothetical other worlds may be, it can ultimately be shown that there must, logically speaking, be a single all-powerful God who is in charge of all these worlds. Needless to say, Gödel's proof had its critics, but it's interesting to note that Gödel himself very much adhered to it, and that in the months leading up to his death, he also became convinced that there's a logical proof that the personality survives death. But I confess I can't follow many of the pages of symbolic logic. It's beyond me. I agree with that statement. I know all the words, but when they're put together that way, I'm like, okay, I'm glad this really brilliant guy believes that there's God and set out to prove it for his own satisfaction and possibly others. Continuing. Nevertheless, it's all very interesting stuff, but it's probably best to leave those interested in this line of inquiry to read Gödel for themselves. So, everybody, you have the challenge laid down. If you want to read from Kurt Gödel and the logical, formal proof of God's existence, go for it. The world of logical proofs is a universe unto itself and pretty hard to enter without considerable training. But on a superficial level, and he means on the level that most of us deal with the subject, I think it does say something that a thinker of Gödel's stature could manage to convince not only others but himself that God can be logically proven, even if there are always going to be those who develop counter-arguments. Well, I said, I guess it's a good idea to tip your hat to all that and to let the reader know it's out there. But what say we get back to the real world? Right, said Bernie. If I were to give the top most compelling proofs of God's existence, they would be as follows. This surprised me. First, there's the Big Bang itself. A lot of people seem to use the Big Bang as evidence that we don't need God. See, the whole thing happened accidentally and by nature. But this scientist, who understands a lot more than I'll ever know, says that the Big Bang itself is evidence of God's existence. It should not be forgotten how recent this theory is, or how powerful an argument it is for the existence of a creator. By the way, the world of science that accepts the Big Bang believes that the universe is about 15 billion years old. When we read our Bibles, we don't see that there, do we? And I've taken kind of a middle ground. I know that God did it when he did it and the way that he did it. But I also believe that the Bible shows the truth of what he did. And so I don't have any trouble with 6,000-year history of mankind and the earth and such. That's interesting, I said. Here we've been talking about the Big Bang throughout these conversations, just taking it for granted. But I know there are a lot of people who hear the words Big Bang and think it suggests just the opposite of God. This is one of those areas where science and religion seem to be at odds, at least in the minds of many people. If there's anything that the Big Bang is not, said Bernie, it's evidence against God's existence. Though people tend to think it's been around forever, the observation of the remnant radiation from the Big Bang is pretty recent. It has only come to be accepted by the majority of scientists in the last few decades. Let's see. Most scientists accept it now, though, right? Yes, said Bernie, but that acceptance constitutes a massive change. Before the Big Bang came along, the consensus among scientists was that the universe had existed forever. The idea had an eternally old universe is at least as old as the ancient Greeks, and among scientists only started to be questioned in the 1920s. It was then that an astronomer named Edmund Hubble noticed that certain spiral nebulae, that is galaxies with a thick center and spiral arms like the one we live in, out at the edge of the then known universe, had pronounced redshift in their spectral lines. What was causing this? The answer came in 1927 when a Belgian Catholic priest, an astronomer named Georges Lemaire, suggested the redshift of these galaxies was a result of the fact that they were moving away from us at a tremendous speed. Light waves are shifted toward the long end of the visible spectrum for a galaxy moving away from us, a phenomenon called the Doppler shift. I'm trying not to read all this. I'm just not sure what to leave out. To me, what this says is that the complexity of the universe shows that there has to be a God. And we'll take a look at a few other things in just a moment about that, but I don't want to read all of this. This was a huge cosmological discovery, but as interesting as it was for astrophysicists, it was an even bigger discovery in terms of the God, no God argument. Genesis, of course, maintains that the universe was created all at once by God, and before the Big Bang Theory came along, it was common practice to use this fact as evidence against the existence of God. Back when it was assumed that the universe was infinitely old and infinitely large, the notion was that it was suddenly created, as in Genesis, seemed preposterous. How could time and space possibly have a beginning? This brings us to what I would say is my number 2 proof, the one we spent a good part of last week discussing, that is the finely tuned nature of the universe. Though we spent a lot of time discussing some of the more impressive examples of just how finely tuned it is, we didn't get into how and when the idea first entered the discussion. One benchmark came in 1961 when a physicist named Robert Dicke proposed that certain forces in physics needed to be fine-tuned for life to exist. Some 20 years later, a very respected cosmologist, Sir Fred Hoyle, advanced this argument further in his 1984 book, Intelligent Universe. Hoyle made famous comparisons between claiming life arose on Earth by accident and claiming a tornado would blow through a junkyard and produce a Boeing 747. Then came John Gribben and Martin Rees, who published a defense for the fine-tuning argument in their 1989 book, Cosmic Coincidences. Since then, the topic has become a popular one. There have been a number of books, like the one you like, Strobel's The Case for a Creator, that try and bring out some of this stuff far enough down to earth for the ordinary reader to grasp. There are at least 6 things, and the fine-tuning of gravity, for example, the amount of power in an electron or in electricity itself, things like that, that if they were just a little bit different, there would not be life. There would not be even a universe, according to this way of looking at it. Now, we attribute all of this to God, who is the master builder, and he created the things that needed to be true to have life and for things to function the way that they are. The same professor that I learned about the 1 in 5,000 things that we looked at initially talked about how every atom holds together because God made it work that way. But when you look at electrons, protons, neutrons, they should not hold together in the atomic structure, and but they do. And so, he even used a scripture that talked about Jesus and said, "In Him all things hold together," and used that. So, it's very important that we understand that without God, nothing would work, nothing would happen, nothing would be here, and that's even on a scientific level. And there are many Christians that accept, if you want to call it intelligent design, if you want to call it theistic evolution, and even some of the ones that accept theistic evolution really don't see God taking a part, taking a role in. I didn't mean to scare you there, Terry. Didn't mean to scare you.
Hey, Sharon.
I'm getting scary.
No, I walked up to the camera. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm going to stop with this. The one concept that he doesn't mention that is important to me in this is consciousness. Without consciousness, evolution cannot explain lots and lots of things, and to me, consciousness is one of the biggest ones. How elements that become amino acids that get struck by lightning can be, hey, I can think, I can talk, none of that makes sense to me. because I don't think evolution could possibly explain it. All right, any questions or comments? Okay. Let's take a look at signature in the cell. And again, I don't want to overdo it. As a matter of fact, let's just look at what's on the paper here. And some of this I shared in a sermon a few years ago, but according to a recent estimate published in 2013, the are 3.72 times 10 to the 13th cells in the typical human body. In other words, 37.2 trillion cells. If you look down a little bit here, where it says by ancestry, and that's ancestry.com, it's not your ancestry or mine, but your DNA could stretch from the earth to the sun and back 600 times. Each strand of DNA in your body could easily be stretched to 6 feet long.
A little tilde mark there means more than.
More than.
That little mark in front of the 600.
Oh, okay. All right, more than 600 times. Gotcha. Yeah, very good.
And it's still 69 itself.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 37 trillion times in one body. That's right. Yeah. I just for reference, I found a thing that said 11 different types of cells in the human body. I wish my pancreatic cells worked a little better. Sex cells would be the cells that split in half to become reproductive cells. Fat cells, we don't have to explain that. I have more than my abundant share of those. Let's see, DNA is the hereditary material in humans and almost all other organisms. Nearly every cell in a person's body has the same DNA. Most DNA is located in the cell nucleus. A lot, as I reread this, a lot of it is where he defends the idea of intelligent design. And probably about 20 years ago, we started hearing about intelligent design. And to me, intelligent design and theistic evolution are not that different. It basically says that evolution by chance cannot possibly explain the world that we live in and everything that we see. Therefore, and one of the things that Stephen C. Meyer talks about is that intelligent design does not necessarily imply God. I don't know if he thinks aliens came to the earth and did this or whatever. I don't know what anybody would consider an alternative to God. Because you have to have intelligence to do it and you have to have the power to do it. Who else but God would be able to do any of that? I think I'm going to skip reading any of the signature in the cell, but it's a good book, and especially toward the beginning. And you can see on here, I wrote out.
The aliens came down and did it.
Yeah.
They made the aliens.
Yeah, exactly. And wouldn't we call the aliens God if they were able to create us, you know? I mean, God is alien to us, right, in some ways, till he made himself known at least. I'm going to skip reading that. I don't want to. All right, let's go to Darwin's secret sex problem. And it's not about. Yeah. It's not about like human sexuality. It's not about things that they would put in movies or romance novels or.
Not R-rated.
Now what?
R-rated.
Yeah, not R-rated. That's right. Yeah. But basically, there are over 2 million species of animals, people, plants, trees, bushes, bugs, all kinds of things.
Finches.
Finches, yes, true. That reproduce sexually. And yeah, that's right. Well, once you get to 2 million, that's a lot. And it could be 3 million. And because, like you said, there are things that they don't even know what they are yet, or that they exist. But the main thing about this book, well, take a look at the quote here, down toward the bottom of the page. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And the author, of course, is none other than Charles Darwin. And so he basically says that the only way that evolution can work is that if you have many, many, many generations, that this one part that is improving the life of these species, and so the ones that have this interbreed with each other, so the next generation has that again a little bit better, and over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, everything gets better. Anything that doesn't fit that pattern would destroy evolution, is what Charles Darwin said.
Evolutionists have swept that quote under the table ever since they latched onto his book.
It was interesting because what F. LaGard Smith does is he talks about maybe 5 or 6 evolutionists who have tried to deal with that and have written about it. Now, others may have looked into it, but yeah. And his premise here is that, let's take the simpler organisms. They reproduced asexually. And what that means is that they were small and not as complex, and that they would basically rip in half, and then the other half would be reformed out of other elements and rejoin them to make a new entity. And so now you'd have 2. And then later on it would rip in half again, and both sides would receive a new half. And then over here this one would rip in half again, and they would keep on multiplying that way. Well, he does not deal with this, but how did asexual reproduction start? Can evolution explain that? I don't think so. How did was it an accident that one of the earliest single cell organisms got split in half and, oh yeah, let's keep doing that? I mean, that would call for an intelligence that was not shown there, was not evidenced there. Now, he doesn't deal so much with that because he's talking about how going from asexual reproduction to sexual reproduction, he says that for sexual reproduction to work, in the first generation that this entity was no longer doing asexual reproduction, but now doing sexual reproduction, not only would the being have to be fully functional, but the other one would too. In other words, if this one's a male, and then the female has to be fully functional in the first generation and completely able to reproduce. It has to happen at exactly the same time in both of them, in the exact same place. They have to find each other. They have to know what they're supposed to do and make it happen. It's not real likely. And so that's what he's dealing with here. Let me read a few things out of this one. I might be the only one who has a copy of it, but you can see the pages there if you ever get a copy of it. You'll want to read the whole thing anyways. There's the quote. Page XXI. I never was good with those Roman numeral things. There it is.
11 and 12.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, 21 and 22.
Yeah. Okay, he says, in the beginning, sex did not exist. Now, this is from the evolutionist standpoint, not from the Bible standpoint. Evolution theory teaches that the first organisms simply copied themselves. So normative gendered sex as seen throughout nature could not have begun without the appearance of the first ever male and female organisms, mating in a never before seen way, and reproducing by a revolutionary method of reducing their chromosomes precisely in half, then blending those halves together to produce one-of-a-kind offspring. How those first ever sexually reproducing organisms possibly could have evolved before sexual reproduction existed is quietly admitted by evolutionists to be the queen of evolutionary problems. Now, I don't know what the king of evolutionary problems are, but you kind of get the gist of this, don't you? That, if being started so simple, and as I said, when I was in biology in 9th grade or 10th grade, I guess it was, that we were taught that, there were these puddles of ooze of elements and maybe lots of tar. I don't know what it was there. Is that an element? I don't know. And then apparently lightning happened and then amino acids formed, and now here we are today. All right. What is that? Oh, okay. In its own struggle for survival in a world of competing ideas, the theory of evolution is proved unfit, not by its insightful observations of what actually occurs in nature, but by a seemingly insignificant detail that could not possibly ever have occurred in nature. Simply put, evolution obviously happens, but evolution cannot explain either the origin of sex or by exclusive pairing of unique male-female sex in each of millions of species. For Darwin's grand theory of microbe to man evolution, those yawning gaps are an insoluble problem. In this book, I'm not concerned about the so-called missing link between apes and humans, nor am I primarily interested in the skeletal remains of Lucy, the ever-intriguing early dinosaurs, the age of the universe, or the 6 days of Genesis. At the end of the book, he reaffirms his biblical view of things. So, he's not jettisoning that by saying these things, or creation versus evolution generally, or even intelligent design versus evolution. Those books from every side have already been written. What we must now understand from the outset is that a single issue presented in this book has more to do with logic and critical thinking than sophisticated science. If credible science could explain the apparent conundrum, there would be no problem to be thinking critically about. Let's see. Some of the terms in here. He says microbe to man. It's what we're talking about with the amino acids all the way up to what we are today. There's another word that kind of jumped out at me here. Well, anyways. All right, let me go ahead. XXVI. All right. So the question is, how did that specialized, unique, radically different mode of reproduction ever come to be, especially considering the complication of germ cell differentiation into male and female? Some will surely insist there are all sorts of creatures that reproduce using less than full-blown male-female reproduction. In other words, hermaphrodites and things like that. So who's to say that real male-female sex could not have evolved in stages? Yet anyone familiar with those creatures will frankly concede that there are daunting problems with each proposed stage. More important for our immediate purposes, we're talking about a huge leap between the most advanced stage of single-cell reproduction one can imagine and full-blown male-female reproduction, in which it's not just a matter of exchanging genetic information, but a precise 50% reduction of chromosomes in both distinct genders, followed by a mind-blowing, intricate process of crossing over. With all the evolutionary talk about millions and billions of years, we tend to forget that time consists of an infinite series of freeze-frame moments, along with the length of time's continuum. If Darwin's grand theory, or even neo-Darwinism, were true, there must have been a single defining moment somewhere along the supposed evolutionary timeline when the unfolding of life is supposed moved from exclusively non-gendered asexual replication to male-female sexual reproduction for the very first time. In this book, I'm suggesting we need to slow down evolution's warring time machine to a single, uniquely critical freeze-frame moment. So he's saying, when did this happen? Don't tell me over billions of years it kind of accidentally came about and then one day suddenly, here we are. It just doesn't seem to work that way. Any questions or thoughts? I'm doing all the talking, and I apologize. You kind of do that when you read, but
Back to page 1 of last month's handout.
yes.
You missed a very good author,
Okay.
Henry M. Morris.
Oh, yes, yes.
So I'll need to add that to your list.
Okay, okay. Yeah, very good.
I stumbled across him in 1984. We used a bookstore in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Henry M. Morris. We had some of his DVDs kicking around here a few years ago.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if there's, I'd have to look to see if I still have copies. But,
Okay.
yeah, we definitely had some of his stuff on Genesis.
I've had a couple of his books. I don't know if I still have them on my shelves or if I've.
I have to go, we've been talking about cleaning up my shelves since we. Henry M. Morris. Excellent creationist.
Mhm.
Yeah. Like I said, I was in the shipyard in Pascagoula, we outfitting the Iowa. Needed something to do because I couldn't come home. They didn't even want me to come home for Lynn's operation.
Oh, boy.
I had to fight for that. That was tough. But, I needed stuff to do. I found a used bookstore.
Yeah, yeah.
Stumbled across Henry M. Morris. It's been on my shelf off and on ever since.
Well, let me read one more section here, just real quick. I'm skipping the section that is entitled "Of Penises and Vaginas." We'll skip that one. Well, there's so many neat stories of the sciences in this book about reproduction and the very strange ways that various creatures reproduce. But this is entitled "An Acorn of Truth." If we focus too much on the animal kingdom, we might miss one of the best illustrations of how sexual development could never have happened by gradual evolution. Take, for example, the mighty oak, of which there are some 500 to 600 species. Oak trees are monoecious, meaning that each tree produces male and female flowers. The male's pollen is carried by insects or wind to the female flowers on neighboring oak trees. After fertilization, the oak produces its trademark acorns, which no other tree produces. So let's talk about the very first acorn ever to appear on the face of the earth. Which came first, the acorn or the oak? If you say the acorn, what possibly would be its evolutionary precursor, since the acorn is unique to the oak? And if you say the oak tree itself, what possibly would be its evolutionary precursor, since oak trees are the unique product of acorns? And don't overlook this critical or this crucial distinction. When we're talking about the 500 plus species of oak trees throughout the world, no dramatic sex change is necessary. All 500 plus varieties have essentially the same mating features and all produce these trademark oak acorns. So drawing from the old line about ducks, if it has leaves like an oak, mates like an oak, and produces acorns like an oak, it must be an oak. That particular species of oak hardly matters. By contrast, there would be nothing simple about evolving the very first oak if from any of its closest non-acorn producing neighbors in the forest. Well, we get the idea. Which came first, the acorn or the oak? And I agree.
I didn't make babies of anything.
That's correct.
Everything was full grown when God made it.
Yep.
And then he put it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and that's the same thing with the chicken and the egg. You know, God made the chicken. If you say the egg came first, then you believe in that evolution explains things.
Right.
And we know that God created the chicken. Well,
And
this.
then he created a road so the chicken could cross it and find Adam.
That's right.
But he needed a name.
That's right. That's right. Yes, yes. Well, good. All right. Well, I hope that it's been instructive and helpful. With us taking the approach of what do young people need to hear? A lot of talk about science comes into their lives, and very little of it suggests that there's a God. And so to me, if they have reason to doubt evolution or that the world could get to where it is without God, to me that's a starting place. And that's why I started here.
How would you start?
Yeah.
Next class is October 1st. Mike is up. And since he's out of town this week, I cannot tell you what his topic is.
Right?
He has not shared that with me yet. All I know is I've provided him lots of material to choose from, and I don't know what he's chosen. So, and then October 1st is the next class. And when he's done with his topic, Joe will teach. We don't know if he's going to have a two-parter or not yet.
2 or 3 or 4.
So Joe's either going to teach the first Friday of November or December. We're not sure yet. So far, Matt and I have both had two-parters.
That's right. That's right.
We don't know how this is going to run.
That's right. That's right. But there seems to be a pattern here.
Yeah, we've already established a pattern. Next class, though, is October 1st. Mike will be our teacher.
I think Mike's got a one problem.
You think?
Don't know.
You think?
I think.
I don't. I just know I provided him scads of material, so we'll see what happens.
You
Yeah.
can still change things.
Yeah.
That's right.
That is.
Yeah, CPD was having a sale on some of the material that I already have on my bookshelf. So to help Mike out, I purchased 3 of the books that are already on my shelf and just brought them into him one Sunday.
Nice. Nice.
Cost me like $12 to get him that material. So
That's a deal at any price.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
hopefully it'll help him out.
Yeah.
If you are interested, next Friday, Ed's gonna have prayer vigil here. And he loves company.
Steve's birthday.
When he's not down speaking, reading, we met next Friday?
Yes.
Yeah, so he'll be done for a little bit of time, but he loves company at his prayer vigil next
I
Friday.
should be back here by 5 o'clock.
So,
Mm-hmm.
That's latest.
Yeah. Yeah.
so ladies on the computer, hear that?
I'm gonna go down Friday morning too.
Yeah.
I see Sharon's head bobbing.
Be there for the start.
To where? Was you good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just up.
Went to Manuel yesterday, Wednesday, and this was in like a museum thing, and it was a barrel, and she was playing the drum.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah. Well, let's, Joe, would you close us with prayer tonight?
Dear Heavenly Father, we're so gracious for the things you've done for us. We give you praise, we give you honor, we give you glory. Father, help us in our daily walk to be more like Christ, to be more forgiving, more loving, thinking of others more highly than ourselves. Father, we thank you for this night that we've had to learn a little bit more about defending the faith, a little bit more about how creation came about, not evolution. Father, we thank you that Christ died on the cross to forgive us for our sins. Father, we ask that you watch over us and continue to bless this church, Father. Help us to grow. Help us to bring more people to you, Father. Help us to mentor and to lift each other up, Father. Father, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Matt. Bye, everybody.